Hello, everyone. This is Paul Elam with A Voice for Men. We've got a new movie coming out Friday called Divorce Corp, directed by Joe Sorge. And I will be speaking with him, bringing him on this interview in just a couple of moments. First, I wanted to acknowledge that I have seen the movie, and I'm going to read you a description here. And I can tell you in reading it, the reason that I'm grabbing something that's part of the promotional material for the movie is because I have seen it, and this description is absolutely accurate according to what I saw. What it says is that Divorce Corp is a new documentary that exposes the practices within the U.S. family law industry. More money and people flow through the family courts than any other court system in America. But because of good intentions run amok, misplaced finances, cronyism, and lacking checks and balances, family courts are corrupted, serving the local legal community instead of the people. Rather than help victims of crimes, these courts often create them. And rather than help families move on, these courts drag out cases for years, ultimately resulting in a rash of social ills. Solutions appear in Scandinavian countries where marriage dissolution is handled without attorneys, courts, or the turbulence and family disintegration so common in the United States. And boy, isn't that the truth. Welcome, Joe, to A Voice for Men, and thank you very much for joining us. I know that you're very busy these days.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks for giving us more exposure for this film.
Happy to do it. Let me just launch into some questions here. Now, some of this is obligatory, and I'm sure you've been asked many questions about 1,000 times over, so I don't want to have you pulling a string on the back of your neck saying things over and over again, but some of them I do need to ask just to get them out of the way. First, can you share with the listeners here just a little bit about what motivated you to make this movie?
Yeah, Paul, I had the opportunity to sit through family court and saw some of the tragic outcomes that happened for other people. I ended up fine. I'm fine, but what I witnessed was shocking. And, I had started a new career in filmmaking, and I was looking for a topic, and what I saw sparked an interest in investigating more. And once we applied some real research to the topic, we were astounded with what we found.
Was there any particular moment or event when the light sort of came on in your head, or you had an epiphany about turning your understanding of family courts into a movie?
Yeah, I think when I saw an attorney instructing the judge how to rule, based on the judge feeling that the attorney had a better understanding of the law than the judge himself, and I saw the interaction between the attorney and the judge, it just seemed upside down. And so I felt that, and then when I saw the unfavorable outcome from some of the people that were in family court, it made me think that there was something to investigate here.
Okay, and I need to ask you, because, as always with something controversial, there's a rumor mill out here that at least part of this was motivated by some very difficult experiences you had with that same system. Is that true?
Well, I wouldn't say, okay. I mean, I would say they were somewhat difficult, but compared to the people in our film, I got off easy.
Okay, so, yeah, those were some just heartbreaking cases. And I'll go ahead and put a plug. I really want to encourage people to see this movie and bring some tissue with you because I saw it in screening and I needed some. I would like to know a little bit more about the personal process for you for making this movie. I'm assuming that you did become at least well acquainted with many of the subjects, hearing some incredibly painful details of their experiences. What was that like for you, going through that process, documenting all this just abject misery that has been produced by these courts?
It was very difficult, I have to say. Some of the people, I could not believe what happened to some of the people. I mean, one of the gentlemen merely criticized his judge on the internet for taking away his children, and the next thing he knows, the district attorney is filing criminal charges against him for intimidating a judge. And I read what he wrote on the internet, and what he said is, by taking my daughters away from me, you are committing the equivalent of child abuse because they can no longer see a father that they want to see. and that landed him in prison for 5 years.
Well, they sure showed him some law and order, didn't they? My goodness.
So, when you meet people like that, and you hear stories like that, it really it can affect you, and it shocked me that, are we in the United States that I know? It just didn't seem right.
Would you do this again, this process? Would you, if you had it to do over again, would you make this movie again?
Yes, I would, but I'll give you a much better answer in a week when I hear the reaction from people going to the theaters. I've got my fingers crossed. I know it's controversial, and there have been people on Facebook that have been avid supporters, and there are other people who are avid detractors, and I just want to see the net result. But I'm hoping that at a minimum we are going to shed a light on a business, a governmental business that I believe needs some attention and reform.
Okay, well, speaking of the dissent from the movie, there indeed has been some harsh criticism and even calls for a boycott, apparently because the movie advocates shared parenting. What's your reaction to this kind of hostile reaction to this movie?
Well, I'd say I'm becoming more. I thought shared parenting was the obvious solution. Our Constitution treats everybody equally, or is supposed to. Our country's supposed to be gender neutral. And so, I thought that we were just merely transitioning from, the culture of the past, which is where, the man worked and the woman stayed at home, to a new modern culture where women were working and the man was working, and they shared, the responsibilities for raising children. So I just thought it was a generational thing. Well, what I'm hearing from some of the women's groups is that they are concerned about the health and safety of children because they fear that men are too aggressive and to handle children on their own. And, I think it's an extreme position. I don't agree with it, but I will admit that some men are aggressive and some men are deviant. And I'm afraid that some of these women have had bad experiences, and that's why they're seeing things through a different lens. And so I'm sympathetic to that. I mean, obviously, it's terrible for a child to be subjected to sexual abuse or physical abuse, or for a child to even witness, a constant, continual abuse in the household between that child's parents. On the other hand, I think it's, from what I can tell, it's a minority of cases where that happens, and I don't think that the solution that some of these groups are proposing, which would be to not allow men to be the parents of children, is the right solution, because, there are many studies that show that children really need both parents in their lives, and they do better in life with two parents. Moreover, most men are good fathers and good people, and you don't want to use the speed bump approach of punishing everybody for a few bad apples. So, and we can argue all day about how many bad apples are out there, what's the percentage. Different studies come up with different numbers based on how you define abuse, etc. But at the end of the day, most men are good people. They're loving parents, and I believe they should be included in child sharing. I'm not saying it has to be strict 50-50. In fact, I think in the Scandinavian model that we studied, the parents cooperate, and maybe 1 month someone goes off on special assignment, and so the other parent needs to take care of the child most of the time, and then that might switch, or someone might work the night shift, someone might work the day shift. What we found is because there was no money in it for any of the parties in Scandinavia, they ended up not fighting over these things the same way that Americans do. And I think it's a reflection of our adversarial system, and a system that, emphasizes the money part of the outcome, can influence whether someone's getting a bigger child support check or paying a bigger child support check, or the reverse. I think it's just perverse, and I think it really impacts these custody battles in a very negative way.
Understood, and I think you pointed that out, I think, very graphically and very convincingly in the movie. I do have to say, with regard to considering the sensibilities of my readers and listeners, is that they're not going to forgive me if I don't point out that the overwhelming evidence about child abuse does not point to fathers as the primary culprits. And so I don't think that sort of position stands very well. And I certainly agree with you, Take, that excluding an entire class of people from the prospect of a connection with their children is not a very sensible approach to the dissolution of a marriage. Let me ask you this. Is there anything about the family law system that you weren't able to cover in this movie, but you would have liked to have?
Well, I would have loved to interview, judges who are currently judges, acting as judges. We talked to some retired judges, but we would have loved to interview the judges that were involved in some of the cases that we used as examples in the movie. Unfortunately, and I don't know if there's a prohibition against it, I'm pretty sure there is, they were not able to comment or be interviewed for the film. So, one of the criticisms of the film is we don't tell both sides of the story. Well, we weren't allowed to tell the judge's side of the story because of the way that, the judicial conflicts. People have also asked, well, why didn't we interview the other spouse? And my answer is because that's not the story. We weren't interested in the he said, she said. We weren't trying to say that one person was a better parent or a better spouse than another. We were talking about experiences that individuals had with the system. And so whatever their personal situation with their spouse was almost irrelevant to the story. What we cared about is their interactions with the system and how the system treated them. So I would have hoped, it would have been a better, depiction of the actual dynamics if the judges were allowed to talk. But since they couldn't talk, we couldn't get that piece of it. So we just had to talk to retired judges about general cases and then use some specific examples to try to illustrate our point.
Well, that's one thing I would like to vouch for you on. I watched this movie with a very, very critical eye through the whole thing very carefully. I didn't miss any parts of it. And I never got the feeling at any point in this movie that this was an expose on people's former spouses. It was an expose on the corruption in the system and nothing more. So I just wanted to offer that bit of support that I don't find that the criticism that you should have talked to the other spouse, I agree with you, it would have turned into something about their bad marriage and not about the system that inflicted further damage on them. Listen, the movie does mention, at least from a historical perspective, no-fault divorce, starting with Ronald Reagan in California and how that moved across the country from there and the resultant skyrocketing divorce rate. Is it your contention that we should abolish no-fault divorce?
No, just the opposite. I think it didn't go far enough. I think that no-fault divorce opened the floodgates on the front end, but didn't make it easier to complete a divorce. And so what happened is you got this mass of people, this pent-up demand went into the court system, and the court system couldn't handle it based on the way it processes a divorce. And so now what we have are courts that are completely overloaded with people wanting to get divorced. And because we use this antiquated adversarial system that's very complicated and very expensive to handle family matters, we have a disaster. What we advocate is open up the back end and make divorce easy. And when we travel to Scandinavia, that's how they do it. They simply fill out a form and wait 6 months. And if they have not reconciled, then they are divorced. No lawyers, no courts. And people say, well, isn't that promotive of divorce? Aren't you, but actually their divorce rate is the same as it is in the United States. So having a system like that does not increase the divorce rate. And so, we just see it as a much simpler, less adversarial, less acrimonial, less expensive system.
Understood. Now, Joe, it seems obvious enough to me that your goal here is to do more than just make a movie. Am I correct about that?
Paul, my personal goal was to make a movie, but I witnessed such tragedy and so many people being so unfairly treated. that, I want to see something done about it. So I would like to organize a conference after the dust settles, after a movie has, played its course, and invite people like you and people from the women's rights groups, legislators, clergy, anyone who wants to contribute to the thought process, and see if we can come up with some reforms that make sense for this antiquated system.
Do you have any concrete plans for that now, or are you just right now just swallowed up in getting this movie released?
Well, I'm pretty much swallowed up in getting the movie released, but I have a book coming out in 2 to 3 weeks called Divorce Corp, same name as the movie. And in the last chapter, I have some, I don't want to call it legislation because I'm not a legislator, I'm not a lawyer, but some basic tenets that I think are somewhat radical for an American, but I believe would greatly improve the system. And again, it's based on the Scandinavian system. And I just have to say, I'm not Scandinavian. I just was very impressed when I went over there and interviewed judges, divorcees, attorneys, and it's just such a different mind frame there. They just don't go to court to deal with these issues. They just settle it like logical people. The same way we settle whether a child, what religious upbringing should a child have. Well, you don't go to court and fight over that anymore. It's up to the parents. When the child's with the mom can teach what the mom wants to teach. When the child's with the dad can teach what the dad wants to teach. And that's the way they handle just about everything when it comes to child rearing.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes if people realize how much damage we're talking about when we're talking about an acrimonious, absolutely hateful divorce that people get into nowadays, and the way that the families are sort of bludgeoned by the courts. These children end up growing up traumatized by this. I think it's very certain that we end up seeing them in our prisons, in our street gangs, on drugs, in truancy, almost any psychosocial measure you can figure for children. You can trace a lot of that back to an absent parent. I hope that there's a good model out there that is getting this stuff right, that if a marriage has to end, that we can do it without destroying the bond between the children and one of their parents.
Well, Paul, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but in Scandinavia, that's the way they do it. Both parents are involved in child rearing, and they share it based on just simple concepts of, well, who has to work this time and who's off, so many days, and when's your vacation, and who has to travel out of town, and they just cooperate. You know why? Because there's no money in it. It doesn't affect the amount of child support. The child support in Scandinavia is a fixed amount for every child in the country, and it doesn't change based on what percent custody time you have. So there's no court battle over child support. And it's amazing how that eliminates 98% of the acrimony that is commonplace amongst divorced parents and their children in the United States.
Folks, I'm talking with Joe Sorge. He's the director of Divorce Corp, which is due to release out in theaters this Friday. I want to suggest that you go see it. Joe, you said you had a book coming out by the same name, and when was that going to be released again?
It's at the printers now. I think we'll have it by the end of the month. And if you want to express interest in the book, come to our website, divorcecorp.com. And there's a page saying you're interested in the book, and when it's ready, we will send you an email, and you can get a copy of it.
That's divorcecorp.com, folks. You might want to check that book out as well as the movie. Joe, do you have any other plans that you can share with listeners now? Is there anything else you want to add to this?
Well, again, I think, I'm not a legislator. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have experience with the legislation, but I would like to see some reform take place. I think it's sorely needed. I think we see an example that may not be perfect for America, but it's an improvement over what we have. I'm not saying that's the exact model we would have to adopt, but I think we should at least learn some lessons from it and try to apply that to our system, because there's far, far less acrimony over there, and I think the children greatly benefit from it. And I think it's remarkable how you can have shared parenting in Scandinavia without the nightmares that the domestic violence people think are going to occur. It happens, but it happens in a very, very small number of cases. And I think a lot of the domestic violence in the United States is a result of the acrimony that the family courts create. And if we didn't have that acrimony, parents, they may not love each other anymore, they may not like each other anymore, but at least they can get along for the benefit of their children.
I couldn't agree with you more. Unfortunately, there's just a whole lot of money in between this society and solutions to this terrible problem. But I'm really glad there are people out there like you that are working on it, Joe. I want to thank you for giving us the time today and wish you the best with the release of your movie and your new book. And we will be following these events and reporting them to A Voice for Men listeners and readers.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.